Hello and welcome to the Future of Work podcast by allwork.space. I'm Jo Mernier and today I'm joined by Cara Ortbal, the remote work HR specialist at Quora. And I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite a long time because I'm really interested to hear Cara's first-hand experience of transitioning Quora from what was a traditional headquartered Silicon Valley company to one that's now fully remote all of the time. So we're going to hear more about that and how the company adjusted to it. And a big part of that adjustment comes from Cara, who joined the company shortly after CEO Adam DeAngelo made the decision to switch to a permanently remote work anywhere strategy, which took place right in the middle of 2020 in the heat of the pandemic. So we'll be learning more about that. And Cara is now managing Quora's remote first culture initiatives, as well as the expansion of its international workforce. So there's quite a lot on your plate, Cara. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Jo. I'm really excited to be here and to talk a little bit more about remote work.
That's great. I'm looking forward to digging into it. So first off, let's just go through the basics. Can you tell us, in Quora's case, what remote first means and what it's like on a day-to-day basis and where and how staff get their work done?
Absolutely. So remote first at Quora really means that employees can work pretty much anywhere in the world with very few exceptions. Certainly we have a couple of folks in our facilities team or IT team that kind of need to be in that headquarters. But beyond that, it is truly pretty much anywhere in the world where we can kind of feasibly hire people. And so we still do have quite a few folks in our Mountain View Bay Area office. That was previously to June of the last year of 2020. It was really Quora only hired people primarily in that location. And so we've really transitioned to being more remote first. And so hiring people in different locations. Like I said, a lot of people are still in Mountain View, but we've really expanded and it's happened quite quickly, a lot faster than we'd anticipated initially. We're kind of going into uncharted territory. So.
Brilliant. And for the people who are working remotely, are they mostly at home?
Primarily they're at home. We did recently start a co-working space program. And so we do reimburse employees if they would like to be in a co-working space. So that could be like WeWork is a really popular one, but we have employees in some private co-working spaces as well. So we really want to offer that optionality and that flexibility for our employees.
Mm-hmm. And how do you choose those co-working spaces? Is it a case of the employee might come to you and say, hey, there's one down the road, it's nice and close, give me a membership, or do you have a list of companies that you prefer to choose from?
Yeah, we really leave it up to the employee. We do have one or two partnerships with pretty large co-working space companies, but we also have actually quite a few employees that live in not major cities, and so it might be kind of a private one-off co-working space, and we will do reimbursement for those. So it's really case by case, and we don't want to be too prescriptive. We do encourage employees to choose private co-working spaces just from an information security perspective. It's really important to us. But outside of that, we are quite flexible with what works best for the employee.
And how has the team as a whole adjusted to the remote work culture? Because I know sort of last year, right in the middle of the pandemic, a lot of people all over the world were forced to work from home, but for some it was temporary. They always knew they'd go back eventually. But Quora made this quite definite decision fairly early on to say, no, we're going remote, we're going to stay that way. So what was the sort of the transition process that happened during that time?
Yeah, so I think it was, it's really dependent person by person. And so we did recognize that some people do really like being in the office. And so that's why we did maintain our building in Mountain View, and that has now turned into a co-working space. So we do have a couple dozen employees who work out of that space regularly. And so we did want to maintain that kind of optionality. But I think there's just a larger kind of movement here where we're seeing this a lot, particularly in tech, where some people do want that traditional office space, and some people do want the flexibility and those options and being able to travel and work and to have that experience. And so I think we're seeing a lot of kind of just resettling that's happening. So employees are trying to kind of do that reflection and say what's important to me and what works best for me, and make those decisions. But it's certainly interesting within tech. We've seen a lot of changes within the industry, and different companies, making different decisions, or kind of, going back and forth. They'll say one thing and then it's kind of changing. And I think I would say, fortunate in that sense that we've made this decision. And so kind of regardless of what happens with the pandemic or with anything else, we're not having to go back and forth with our messaging. And so I think we're fortunate in that case, because I do feel for those companies that are having to try to, and those HR teams that are having to try to wrestle with that. It's really challenging.
Yeah. And as you say, it must be unsettling for the people that are dealing with it, because you've got the pandemic still going on and all the uncertainties and worries that comes with that. And on top of that, you've got a company that doesn't know whether it's going to be staying remote or coming back to the office, and how it's going to work.
Yeah, it's really quite challenging. And for facilities teams too, it's been so much work. Our facilities team is phenomenal, and they've been great at turning our physical space into a co-working space and having those precautions and safety protocols. But it's a lot of work. Yeah, and it's constantly changing, and it's I think for our head of facilities, he's constantly trying to work through what's the latest law or regulation for both the city, the state, the country, and trying to just grapple with all of that. It's a lot.
Yeah, that is a lot.
Yes.
Don't envy you. And in terms of the culture at Quora, obviously one of the things that the company did very early on, when it made the commitment to become remote first, was to hire a remote work specialist, which is you. So this tells me that the company recognized really right from the get-go that transitioning to a remote culture from a previously in-person, face-to-face organization would need specialist help. So can you tell me a little bit about how you and your team have worked to build this new remote culture at Quora?
Sure. Yeah. So I would say, first of all, in terms of culture at Quora, I don't know if it's new so much as it's just different and kind of evolved and adapted. So it's still very much Quora, and kind of the things that the values that we hold are still very true, but it's just remote, and so it's been kind of a shift to that. I would say this last year has really been focused on kind of building the foundation on which we are able to hire internationally. And so that has been quite a logistical feat, but we really have been trying to work on creating really, to the extent possible, consistent employee experiences. And so these little things that we wouldn't even think of, like trying to make holidays consistent across employees in 15 different countries.
Wow.
And trying to make these just really consistent experiences. And how do we develop just the basic infrastructure within our teams? How do we make our HRIS kind of scale to that, which our HRIS is very much meant for US employees. And so we've been really focused on trying to kind of build that foundation. But of course, we've also done kind of traditional fun culture things as well. One of Quora's great traditions is called Off-Road. It's essentially our version of a hackathon where employees for a whole week don't do their regular work, but they take on a project. And so we did this virtually, and it went really well. We did kind of an Olympic theme, and so we put employees into teams. We had a bunch of fun events. We had trivia and scavenger hunts, but then we also had other team awards that were related to the actual projects, and so it was quite fun. So we've certainly done some more of that traditional culture stuff as well, but I would say that the primary focus has been on just building that really strong foundation.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so important. And one of the things that ties into that we write about a lot on All Work is well-being and wellness in the workplace. What kind of initiatives do you implement at Quora, both for your in-office people and those working from home?
Absolutely. So I think there's a couple of things that play into that. One, we started, our HR business partners have started a regular weekly mindfulness group that just it's about 45 minutes, walks through kind of a guided meditation just to kind of recenter. We try to have that at a relatively friendly time zone wise, which is difficult, but we do our best. And we also have one that is more friendly for our folks in India. So we try to balance it there. And then, the other thing I would say is we've offered employees a remote work reimbursement for any kind of office equipment, and we're very generous with that, I would say. So we really anything that makes remote work better for that person. So one of my colleagues was able to reimburse an air purifier because that was really something that she wanted in her space that kind of helped her. And then finally, I would say just really being intentional about our benefits. We have an employee assistance program, EAP, that provides mental health support and counseling. We're fortunate that they are global, and so we have that for every country that we're in. So employees have access to that resource as well. And so that's been really important for us. And beyond that, just outside of that, just other medical benefits. And that goes back to what I mentioned before, which is trying to create consistency as much as possible, which is challenging. And so, we've tried to say, okay, everyone gets private health insurance, but then in some countries that just doesn't really make sense because, Israel, Germany have such strong social medicine. And so we've had to kind of try to weigh those things, which is tricky when we don't have that background of that country. So
yeah. Okay. And just moving on to technology. I read one of your posts on LinkedIn at the start of the pandemic, which there was a general concern that the technology Quora needed to support a truly remote workforce at large scale wasn't quite ready. So like everybody else around the world, you had to work with what was available to you. So how did you get past that? And obviously we're quite a little way on now from the point at which the company went fully remote. What tools do you use to enable effective collaboration between your people, and what have you sort of tried and tested along the way?
Absolutely. So we stick to probably a pretty standard tech company suite of Slack, Google, Zoom. We also use Clip pretty heavily, which is similar to Google Docs. It's kind of a collaboration documentation tool. And then we've also just started testing other tools. I think with the pandemic, with this shift to remote work, the remote tool space has kind of exploded, and there are so many options. A lot of them are still quite new, and so they're still refining and improving. And so we've created a remote tools working group, which is a group of cross-functional folks. We have ICs, managers, folks from engineering, sales, just kind of a good cross-section of folks to try out different tools. And so we've been doing demos. We've tested a number. We've recently implemented our first tool. It's called Poll Everywhere. It kind of helps with interaction. within presentations. And so it helps to have that kind of real-time feedback, so you don't feel like you're just sitting at a screen watching a presentation, but you're actually engaging and interacting. And so we've tested and we've continued to test. I think, like I said, though, a lot of these tools are still really young. And so, I'll be really excited and interested to see where they are in the next 2 to 3 years, or sooner. I think that they'll start, as we know, technology does improve quite quickly. So
that's it. Yeah.
We're definitely seeing the early stages of that right now.
And talking of Zoom, and not just Zoom, I'm not picking on Zoom, but any video calling technology, there is such a thing as Zoom fatigue or video fatigue. And I read recently some companies are now adopting sort of video free hours during the week. So for instance, they might have core meeting hours between 10 and 2 and no meetings at either side of them. And that's partly to enable people to sort of get off their screens a little bit, but also to help, for example, working parents who might have to go and collect children from school and so on. And of course, that does help with different time zones, as I'm sure you appreciate as well.
Yes.
And do you have any policies at Quora to help make the working day more flexible, given that you're working with people in multiple time zones and positioned all over the world?
Yeah, so our policy that we've started with and that we still have is we have these coordination hours. And so with the exception of our sales team in India, we do expect that employees are able to work between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. Pacific. Now, that's tricky in certain locations, but we're really upfront with employees throughout the recruiting process while they're still candidates about that expectation. And so we still do have that. I would say, generally speaking, our employees and our management team is quite flexible and understanding with employees and their schedules. It's not uncommon to see the pet or the child pop up in the same background, and that is totally okay. In fact, you might I think my dog just got back from his walk, so you might see mine popping in here.
He's welcome to join us.
So I think that that's what we've done so far. I think we are starting to think about what could asynchronous work look like, right? And we're just starting to have those conversations. And again, that does go back to the technology. Like, do we have the tech infrastructure in place to be able to really accommodate something like that? What could that look like? And we'll see. We're just starting to kind of think through those things and have those initial conversations. So I would say right now it really is up to the individual teams, individual managers of kind of accommodating that. But generally, I would say we are quite flexible. So
yeah. And has it meant that you've been able to hire from anywhere now that you've shifted from having a sort of a headquarters in a specific location and being remote? Does it mean that you've now been able to really expand your hiring circle and hire based on talent rather than location?
Absolutely. So with very, very few exceptions, there are a couple countries in which there are some information security concerns, but outside of that, we've, like I said, we're now in 15 countries, which, prior to June of 2020, we were in US, and then we had just started our India site. So we were in 2. So we've really, truly expanded that quite quickly. And we use, for that, just on a kind of logistical note, we use both a PEO model as well as our own entities. So Quora now has Quora India, which is our first, which was kind of in the works pre-pandemic as well. We also have Quora Canada, which started at the very beginning of this year, and then Quora Ireland, which is very new still, just about a month in to having employees within that entity. And then any group outside of that, or any country outside of that, we've used a PEO model, so an employer of record, so a vendor. And, they both certainly come with their own sets of challenges, as with, as you could imagine. So,
yeah.
That
was my next question.
Yes.
What are some of the challenges that you've experienced since you joined Quora a bit less than a year ago? And in the adjusting to the remote culture, hiring from anywhere, what are some of the biggest challenges you found and how have you overcome them?
Yeah, so I'd say for both the entity model and the PEO model, there are some unique challenges. So for the entity model, it's really just this huge cross functional logistical lift. So we're working with legal, finance, facilities, HR, and trying to kind of understand a country and employment laws and tax laws that none of us are familiar with. And so we do, of course, rely on outside counsel. But I think one of the things that we've learned, both with the entities and with the PEO, is that there's what's legal and then there's what's common. So, for example, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me right now, but in Germany, which we have an employee in Germany, there is the legally required number of days off, but no employer actually gives that, right? Like it would be offensive, we've learned, to give that. And so oftentimes external counsel will only advise on what is legal. And so we have to do some kind of digging to figure out what is acceptable and what is common. So we've each kind of connected with people on LinkedIn who we know who have experience in other countries. With Germany, one of our employees who's fabulous, works in Germany, is German and worked there for a while. And so she kind of helped advise us there. So I think that is just kind of entering into the unknown. And truly with the entities, it doesn't necessarily get easier every time because it's a new country each time.
Yeah.
And then on the PEO, which I should say a professional employment organization, so it's this employer of record model. It's really challenging for us and for them. Oftentimes they are direct in some countries, so they have their own teams, but more often than not, they're actually using another third-party vendor in the back end. And so you're kind of playing this like really frustrating and slow game of telephone to try to understand, when we have a question, it's like we ask them and then they ask them, there's just this kind of challenge there. And so they, the vendors, I think, do the best they can, but it is challenging. And so that's something that I do see and hope that will improve in the next few years. And there's a few companies on the PEO side that are really starting to be more kind of platform focused. And so I think in a couple of years, I think we'll be in a much different place. And I'm, cautiously optimistic.
That's good to hear. So a lot of the time it comes down to good old fashioned phone communication, collaboration, asking lots of questions.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that is another thing with the time zones, right? Because like our vendors in Europe, it's tricky. So we're, trying to how many 8 a.m. calls, and there's only 5 days in a week. And so trying to navigate with that it's challenging.
Well, we're doing the same. It's 9 o'clock your end, isn't it? 5 o'clock
right,
for me. So but we make it work thanks to the wonders of technology.
We make it happen.
And in terms of your staff, so many of them are now working at home, and that in itself introduces its own challenges for them. We all know, as you say, your dog might come wandering in at any moment, and it's so easy just for children or cats to walk across the keyboard, etc. So that's quite a challenge when you're trying to get your work done. Also, for some people who don't necessarily have a private office or a spare bedroom they can sit and work from. Working from home isn't always as easy as some people think it is. So how do you help your staff to create the right home environment, one that's productive and one that keeps them busy and motivated?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I mentioned, we do have the remote, reimbursement that we do offer employees, and it is quite generous. It's a pretty significant sum for the first year, and then we have kind of upkeep for every year thereafter. So that's one of the ways. I would also say we just, we really encourage employees to kind of take charge of their workday, of their workspace, and one of the examples that comes to mind is our CFO. He has blocked off on his calendar most days during the week, and it's during coordination hours that he has to go pick up his daughter. And it's not like a private hold, like it's a public hold, everyone can see it. But I think that just shows a great example, really leading by example, that it is okay to do those things. And that's one of the perks, right, about being able to be remote, is that you're able to, go run a load of laundry in the middle of the day, or pick up your kid, go take your dog for a walk. And so I think those things are, I think it's really great that our leadership team is kind of modeling that for employees. And that's something that we do talk to employees about when they join in our onboarding, processes is, take breaks, like go take a walk. I think it's so easy, and, maybe easier said than done, and maybe not the best example of this myself, but so easy to just go and sit down and sit here and stare at a screen for 8 hours. And
it is,
really reminding employees that, hey, when you were in an office, you would go grab coffee with someone down the street. It is okay to do that, and you should do that. It's really important. And so, I've seen all kinds of, one of our business partners has like a workout every day, and she's like, hard block, do not book over this time. Like this is when I work out. And people respect that. And so I think it's really encouraging and empowering employees to do those types of things.
And do you miss the office?
Yeah, it's a funny question. I do in some ways. Yeah. And I think that is where we have, this distinction of remote work and then remote work during a pandemic. And I would try as best we can to separate those things out, but I think it's hard because for many of us, myself included, pandemic is the only time that we've ever worked remotely, right? And so it's really hard to kind of separate out those things. One thing that we've said from the beginning, and that we've still said, even though we haven't necessarily been able to act on it, is that remote doesn't mean you never see your coworkers in person. That is something that we really want, is to be able to bring everyone together. Logistically, that's going to be extremely challenging with the current situation that we're in. I think it's, I think becoming remote first and having employees globally is going to actually, frankly, make that harder, right? Because of travel restrictions with countries and all of that. And so we're starting to think about those things. I think this summer we'd really hoped like, oh yeah, we can start doing that. And then things changed. And so we've had to be, flexible and patient. But it's certainly our intention that employees are able to connect with one another. And, we're trying to think about ways where we can say, maybe you can't get together with your whole team, maybe we can't get together as a whole company, but can you meet with someone who's in your area, if it's safe and appropriate, right? And so I think, those are the things that we're thinking about. And that's what I miss, right? Like being able to see people in person. And I was really lucky that I was able to, just kind of happenstance, I had a trip planned to California, and one of my coworkers happened to be in the same city. And so we got to meet up, and it was so great. And I'm like, I want to do that with everyone. So so I think from that perspective, I do miss seeing people in person, but I'm, again, cautiously optimistic that we'll be able to do that soon.
Absolutely. And with restrictions easing, it should become a little bit easier
hopefully
going forward. Yes,
absolutely.
Well, we're nearing the end of our conversation, but I just have one last question for you. based on everything that you've learned since you joined the company. Quite a strange time of our lives, really, when you first entered Quora. So that was December 2020, wasn't it? When you first joined the company.
Yeah.
So it was still in the heat of COVID-19. There's a lot going on. The company's just switched to remote work, so there was quite a lot thrown at you straight into the deep end. But with everything you've learned along the way, what 2 or 3 big takeaways can you give our listeners to help them adapt to remote work and really sort of hit the ground running?
Absolutely. So I would say a couple things. I'd say the first is really documentation. That's something that we've really been trying to encourage our employees to do. And we're not at the point yet where we've dove into asynchronous work, but I think even still having that process documentation is so important. I would say, and I tell this to our new hires a lot, and this is true for me, that working remotely and onboarding remotely are very different things. At my previous company, I was at Uber for about 5 years. And, when the pandemic hit, I had 4 years with all of these people. And so we were just able to kind of transition to remote. It was still challenging, but onboarding remotely and starting brand new and feeling like you're really frankly bugging people because you're messaging them all the time versus being able to turn to the person next to you and be like, hey, what is this? It feels different. And so I think documentation can only help that. And so we've tried to be a lot better about really just documenting all our processes. We've done that on the HR side, but I know that other teams have been doing that as well. And I think that is really important. The other thing I would say, and I think this is something Quora has been quite good about, and this really is credit to our leadership team, to our CEO, that we've really been very kind of diligent about ensuring that our office in Mountain View doesn't become a center of gravity. And so we've implemented a number of measures to ensure that people outside of the Bay Area don't feel like they're missing out. So one of them is that in any given meeting, the expectation is that everyone is on their own Zoom tile. So even if 2 people are in the same location, you still need to be on your own tile. And I think that's really helped. And it's a credit to our employees too, because they've been quite good at adhering to that and really ensuring that their colleague in Estonia or in Mexico doesn't feel left out. And then the other thing that is related to that is that our executives have been really diligent about not going into the office every day. So that was something that Adam, our CEO, said really early on was, I will not go into the office more than once a month, and the same expectation for the rest of the executive team. And so that's really helped to make sure that employees don't feel that way as well. And then finally, last thing I would just say is, like I said before, remote work shouldn't mean that you don't see people in person. Like that's not the goal. We've had that challenge because of the pandemic, but really trying to kind of mentally separate those two, even though it's tricky. I think that is important to remember, that it doesn't mean that you can't have that social interaction and that piece as well. And frankly, like even my coworkers who I haven't met in person, I feel so incredibly connected to them. Like I have like this, deep trust. I have an amazing team, and I can say pretty confidently that we all feel that way about one another. And so it is possible to have that over Zoom as well. So
Fantastic. Well, that has been an absolutely fascinating insight into Quora and how you've managed to transition from into a remote first culture. And I've really enjoyed learning all about it. So thank you so much, Cara, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Joe. This has been great.
And if our listeners wanted to get in touch with you or to learn more about the company's culture, how would they do that?
LinkedIn. LinkedIn is probably the best spot for that. I do have Twitter. I'm not very active on it. So.
Okay. We'll pop a link on the transcript.
Perfect.
So that's it. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Joe. Take care.